You know that we are sitting in the room with one of the godmothers of the discipline of primatology. It was 1971 when she first went to Borneo to study the orangutans, creatures that had whispered something inside her heart for many years before that. Now, the story goes, right, that she said, I'm going to go there, and people said, don't bother. Don't bother going. They're too elusive. They're too scared of humans to be approached. But luckily for us, she did not listen, and she went. And she patiently waited for the orangutans to become used to her so that she could observe them going about their business without interrupting them. And to give you an idea of how significant this is, right, what did we know about wild orangutan behaviour or society, biology, before her work? Basically nothing. It's only through the doctor's perseverance that she found what they ate. Really simple facts that you would have thought we would have figured out by then. They've got over 400 different types of food. She discovered their complex social hierarchies, their interactions. She discovered just how long it took for the wild mothers to be ready to have another baby. She just discovered so much about this species. Now, she started as one of the trimates, I suppose. This was a nickname given to the 3 strong women who studied these amazing animals: Jane Goodall with the chimpanzees, Diana Foster with the gorillas, and Biruté with the orangutans. But she stuck a landing on her career in a really different way than those women did, and than most academics do. She never gave up studying in the field, and I can't tell you how unusual that is, right? Normally, fieldwork happens really early in your career, and then after that, you go and visit a student and look like you carry a clipboard, right? It's really unusual for someone of her stature to have such a relationship with the animals that she studies. I can't emphasise that enough. It is truly, I don't think anyone's gone near that level in the world in terms of duration or depth. So before we hear her speak, we wanted to show you a bit of a refresher on some of her work. We've got a little section of the film, Born to be Wild.
Thousands of miles away in Indonesia, Dr. Biruté Galdikas continues her lifelong effort to save orphaned orangutans. Over 300 of them live here at her care center on the island of Borneo.
Tidak, tapi barangkali saya kasih minuman kepada ikan mas. Iya.
All these orangutans are here for one reason. Their mothers have been killed and their forest home cut down.
Ya, silakan makan.
These are the lucky ones who survive.
They are so fragile as infants. Like our own kids, they need lots of love and attention. I've studied wild orangutans for 40 years. And we use that knowledge to simulate the different stages of orangutan development, with humans acting as surrogate mothers.
These orangutans are the same age as human toddlers. They're too immature to play in the real jungle, but a jungle gym helps them learn the skills they'll eventually need in the wild.
Come on, baby, let the good times roll. Come on, baby, let me thrill your soul, yeah. Come on, baby, let the good times roll.
young orangutans still need milk, and lots of it.
Come on, baby, let the good times roll. Roll all night long. Feels so good. Now that you're home. Come on, baby, rock me all night long. Come on, baby, don't you lock the door. Come on, baby, let's rock some more. Come on, baby, let the good times roll.
Orangutans here are under human care, but not control. They need to retain their wildness.
Gambar roti. Ah. Nah, ke sini, ke sini.
These orphans grow up so differently than wild orangutans. But as long as they feel loved, they'll have the confidence they need later in life. I often wonder if they miss the touch of their real mother, or do they even remember her at all?
Orangutans are happiest that play in the jungle. And this group is now old enough to explore the forest that surrounds the care center. These trees bear the same fruits they'll find in the rainforest. For many, it's their first taste of the wild.
This is Sanaga. He knows all the best spots to find fruit, like wild durian, a stinky but delicious treat. All orangutans have their own personality. Hombre is a real comedian. I'll never forget Hombre's rescue. We drove for hours through a giant palm oil plantation. It was once pristine rainforest and home to Hombre's mother. She was killed, and he was captured and kept as a pet. But orangutans are not meant to be pets. Ya, saya mau ambil orangutan.
Tidak bisa itu, karena itu sudah lama saya pelihara, Ibu.
Tetapi itu
Ibu
tidak
harus ganti
cocok.
rugi sama saya.
Waduh.
Berapa? 2 juta. Tidak bisa, Ibu. Itu harganya.
My son Fred has a special touch with orangutans.
Andre refused to get in our truck. He had his heart set on another ride. Young orangutans cling to their mothers for dear life, so holding on tight is in their blood.
Now, there is only one woman who can tell us if what the voice of God just said is true. So please join me with a big round of applause for Dr Biruté Galdikas.
Thank you. Good evening. I am delighted to be back in Australia. Australia is an incredibly beautiful country and with very friendly people. So it's my privilege and my pleasure to be back in Australia. I am also delighted to be here in Newcastle for the first time. I've really enjoyed it here, and I hope to come back again. And I'd like to talk about my experience and a little bit about my science dealing with orangutans. Oh dear. Next, please. Doesn't work. I sometimes give talks to elementary school children, and gave a talk several years ago to an elementary school in Florida, and there was a question and answer period. And the first question that an 8-year-old pupil asked me when he saw this particular slide was, "Who is that woman?" And I had to explain that that was me 50 years ago. So I've been very fortunate. And next, please. I've been very fortunate because when I was a graduate student at UCLA in Los Angeles, I had a dream. And that dream was that I would go to Southeast Asia and I would study orangutans and learn more about them than any other person had ever learned, and that I would share this knowledge with the world. And I was very fortunate because I met Louis Leakey. And Louis Leakey was a giant in his time. He was actually called the Darwin of human evolution. And he and his wife Mary had found various fossils that helped elucidate the course of human evolution. So this is me with Louis Leakey, big-eyed and bushy-tailed, whatever. And I went to Borneo, and my then-husband, Rod Brindamore, went with me. And he stayed almost 9 years, and then he left to go back to Canada to finish his university degree, and he never came back. Well, I was very fortunate. Next. And again, I keep using the phrase, I'm very fortunate, and I really feel it. And one of the ways in which I was fortunate was that I went to Borneo. And Borneo, had I not gone to Borneo, Louis Leakey asked me to go to what was then called Zaire. now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to study what were then called pygmy chimpanzees, now bonobos. And I said to Louis, because we couldn't get permissions, it was like 3 years waiting to get permissions. And I said, no, I said, it's going to be orangutans. So I went to Borneo. And when I say I was very fortunate, it's fortunate in two ways. And the first way is that most of the people who worked with me and continue to work with me now, we have 250 assistants who do the work. Both help me with the orangutan, wild orangutan research, and with the orangutan rehabilitation that you saw in the film. That's my first bit of fortune. My second bit of fortune is that I met my husband, Pabohab bin Chalan, and he was one of the people who initially helped me. And he is the person, do I have a laser here? Well, he's the person in the middle. And these are three Dayaks who were initially very helpful with me. All of them are gone now. My husband died 2 years ago. Like I said, we were married 43 years, and I'm like Queen Victoria. I don't know if you know about Queen Victoria, but after her husband, Prince Albert, died, she did not leave her palace for 12 years. And she wore black until the day she died, because she was still grief-stricken about Prince Albert's death. Well, I think I'm going to be the same way. I don't wear black, but it's not the custom anymore. So Pabohab was an incredible person. He was an indigenous Dayak, and he hunted with a blowgun, and he knew the forest like the back of his hand. He could tell you every tree in the forest. He could tell you what the trees were used for, so on and so forth. So I feel extremely fortunate, both in the fact that I went to Borneo and the fact that I found Pabohab, the love of my life, in Borneo. Could we go back, please? I study orangutans, and orangutans are an endangered species. Orangutans are also unique. They're very different from the other great apes. They're very different from most other animals. Next, and this is their distribution. This is apologize, I don't have a laser here, but you can see that their distribution is a relic one. They're only found in northern Sumatra and in parts of Borneo. And in Sarawak, there's only about 3,000 wild orangutans left. And where I work, central Indonesia and Borneo, which is basically the capital of orangutan distribution, and there's probably maybe 20, 30,000 left. And you can see orangutans are only found in Borneo and Sumatra. Next, please. Thank you. So I mentioned that orangutans are unique. How are they unique? Well, one of the ways that they are unique is that they are one of our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom. They are not as closely related to us as chimpanzees and gorillas. In fact, we can get a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee, and they can get a blood transfusion from us. But if we got a blood transfusion from an orangutan, we would die. It's impossible. And I have read that there are people on this planet who have chimpanzee blood in their veins. And one of them, I don't know if you know who this is, but I suspect you do, is Keith Richards. I think he's a guitarist of the Rolling Stones. And when he had to go to Japan, the Japanese in the past were very strict about, rock and roll stars coming, and they would test them for drugs, test their blood for drugs. So Keith Richards apparently had a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee before he went to Japan. And the thing is that as long as the blood types are matched, we humans can get a blood transfusion from a chimpanzee one time. If you try to get it a second time, already there have been antibodies made against the chimpanzee blood. So orangutans are also unique because they are solitary. They are semi-solitary. And if we look at the different age 6 classes, they differ in their sociality. They're also tool users. In the wild, they use tools, and not, can't quite call them tool makers, but sometimes you can see evidence that they'll break a branch, then break it again, so they're making a tool. And I saw a wild orangutan once, an old male, do that in order to make a stick of the proper size, proper length, to scratch himself. So he's a tool maker. It's idiosyncratic, but still tool making. And of course, almost every night they make a nest to sleep in. Next. And where do orangutans live? Well, Borneo and Sumatra, but they live in lowland tropical rainforest. Next. Nipa mangrove swamp. Next. They live in peat swamp forest. And in fact, in Borneo, this is the place where you find the greatest density of orangutans. Next, again, tropical rainforest. And you can see in this picture that there's an orangutan male sitting on top of a nest. And most of the time they make nests in the treetops. Very rarely. They will sleep on the ground, but it's very rare. And they also, next please, they also live in the mountains in the center of Borneo, but their distribution there is very different. And I like to say that orangutans are also unique because we share an ancestry with chimpanzees and gorillas. We separated from chimpanzees and gorillas in terms of ancestry about 6 million years ago. And then we went on our separate trajectories. And, if you use a biblical or a mythological or whatever you want to call it a biblical analogy, we left the Garden of Eden. And in reality, what happened is the tropical rainforest receded behind us. And we, the common ancestors of chimpanzees, gorillas, bonobos, were left behind on the savannas of Africa. And where were orangutans? Well, orangutans receded with the forest. They never came down to the ground. And even to this day, they spend 95% of their time in the forest canopy. So I'd like to talk a little bit about orangutan adaptation. Next, please. So that was the long call. Could we go back to the... let's not hear it again. That was the long call of the adult male orangutan. And I mentioned that orangutans are solitary or semi-solitary. That's one way in which they are unique. And the adult males are the most solitary of all age-sex classes. And so what happens is that an adult male goes through the various stages of his life, and by the time he reaches adulthood, he has big cheek pads, he has a throat pouch, and basically he is now alone. The only time that he will be in association with other orangutans is when he is consorting with a female. And these consortships don't last very long, sometimes a few days, and they're almost invariably ended by the adult female. And why are they ended by the adult female? He's 2-3 times her size. An adult male orangutan might weigh 300 pounds, even larger, not quite like a gorilla. And she may weigh 100 pounds. Sorry, I'm from North America, so I still use the pound system. And who wants? They're fruit eaters. So, what female wants a big glug, to come into a fruit tree and eat all the fruit? And so after they consort for a few days, in the early morning, before he wakes up, they're each sleeping in their individual nest. She gets up and she sneaks away. And what happens with the male? Okay, the sun rises, dawn breaks, he leaves his nest, he looks around, the female's gone. Doesn't know what to do. So he looks this way, he looks that way, he long calls, nothing. He looks in the other direction, he long calls, nothing. She's gone. And he usually doesn't see her again until maybe another 7 or 8 years when she comes back into receptivity. Because one of the ways that orangutans are unique, I keep mentioning how unique they are, is that they have the longest birth interval of any mammal. A female orangutan, on average, in our area of Borneo, gives birth, gets pregnant, once every 8 years. Now, you think about that. That means that orangutans are very vulnerable to extinction. They're not like rabbits or like even wild pigs. A wild pig may give birth to a litter of, 10 piglets every 2 years. And wild pigs are extremely difficult to eradicate for this reason, because their productivity their reproduction is so high. Ask Texans about it. They're trying to get rid of wild pigs in Texas. It's really quite amazing. And in Borneo, we did get rid of them. And what happened was African swine fever, or swine flu. And suddenly, all the wild pigs in our area were staggering, literally falling over dead. And they still haven't come back. This happened, I think, in 2022, middle of 2022. They still haven't come back. So disease can be very, very potent in terms of destroying populations of wild animals. Next, please. Now, orangutan females suckle their young, sometimes for almost 8 years. In Sumatra, the birth interval is sometimes 10 years. So imagine, the female only comes into receptivity, only wants to mate once 8 to 10 years. So what do you have? Well, you have a lot of grumpy males traveling the forest. I'm serious about this. And a receptive female is like a golden fruit, like a ripe golden fruit. And you know that a wild female, is receptive because suddenly you start getting adult males show up and sub-adult males. And this is when the adult males combat. This is when they fight. And sometimes, it's rare, but it happens, they actually kill each other when they fight. But if there's no female involved, then what happens is the dominant male will chase the subordinate male, and the subordinate male will run for his life, or he will sit in the forest canopy, absolutely immobile, frozen, in order to avoid the attention of the dominant male that is passing by, or who is long calling in the distance. So, next. So the next stage of an orangutan's life is juvenilehood, and these are young juveniles, one male, one female. And this is when male and female life histories begin to diverge, because the female still hangs out with her mother, The mother doesn't push her out of the nest particularly. But as the male grows older, as he becomes an adolescent, the mother pushes him out of the nest, literally and figuratively. She bites him, she snaps at him. And eventually, the male moves on. He leaves his mother's home range and he starts roaming the forest. And he is now nomadic. And what he's doing is he's looking for an area of forest where there is no dominant male. Maybe the dominant male died, maybe the dominant male was, killed by poachers, but there's nobody there. Well, an adult male orangutan who was born in East Borneo may actually end up dying in West Borneo, having gone through central Indonesian Borneo. And so the males are basically nomadic. And once he loses his dominance, and other males come in, she has to go. And, I've seen some of these really old, tired, adult male orangutans who are no longer copulating, they're no longer long-hauling, their cheek pads have fallen over, and they have a few gray hairs on their heads, and they just travel, because they no longer they don't have territories, but he no longer holds a home range with females in it. Okay, next. So this is a subadult male, and they are left their mother's home range, as I mentioned, and they have begun to roam. So this is one that we took this picture, but we haven't really seen him since. And we don't know what happened, where he went, whether he died, or what happened, because they roam. But the females, next please. This is an adolescent female. And yes, they're very pretty. And the interesting thing about them is that they are actually social. You'll find adolescent females who are not sisters. They're not sisters because they have different mothers and also they're approximately the same age. Sometimes travel together for weeks. And I've even seen them very occasionally groom each other and even play a little bit together. So the adolescent females are relatively social. And that's partially because all the females in an area are related. They're very closely related. They're like clans. They're kin groups. So what you have in Borneo is you have a series of female clans, one after another, neighbors, and they know who they are. And I've seen, it's very rare, but I once saw an older female playing with an infant. And I didn't know at the time because we hadn't done the genetic studies. And I thought, I bet you that's grandmother playing with her granddaughter, while mom was off feeding. And later when we did the genetic studies, it looked like that's what it was. So the females are somewhat social. But after the adolescent female becomes an adult and she gives birth to an offspring, gradually she becomes less social. And by the time she has her second offspring, her second infant, she is now almost totally solitary. She'll occasionally meet with another adult female. She might meet up with an adolescent female, but they're not going to spend days together. And next, please. And they don't start giving birth until they're 14 or 15 years of age in the wild. And so if you think about a female that gives birth at the age of 15 and then gives birth every 8 years, if she's fortunate. How many offspring is she going to have in a lifetime? 4 maybe? 5? If she's extraordinarily fertile. So, we have a problem here simply because these animals, do not give birth very often, and they're widely spread apart, they're relatively rare, and the females stay and the males come and go. So this is a wild adult female and her son. And if you look at their faces, if you look at their mouths, you notice the black stain. That's because they've been eating something called rangas fruit. And I had an experience with rangas fruit, or rangas sap. I once sat on a log, and then I came, back to my hut. And for the next few days, my buttocks burned because rangas is acidic. So orangutans have, more stronger digestive juices or skin or whatever, but the black stain is the acidic stain of the rangas fruit that they've been eating. Now, I'd like to go back to this emphasis that I have been making. I've been saying that orangutans are unique. So, the real reason that orangutans are unique, the real reason that over the years I have had what I would call almost a spiritual connection to orangutans is because they are not our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom. There's something different, and there's something more unique. Because orangutans, remember what I said, my analogy? They never left the Garden of Eden? Well, it's true. They stayed behind, and we went forward. And the African apes went forward on the savannas initially of Africa, and orangutans stayed behind. Orangutans are not closely related to us as the African apes. Orangutans are more closely related to our ancestors, to our human relatives, our hominine relatives, 10, 12, 14 million years ago, than we are. Genetically, they resemble our ancestors. Now, they are not our parents, they are not our mothers or fathers, but they are the equivalent of maybe our uncles or our aunts. They're almost ancestors, or not quite ancestors, but almost ancestors. So when we look into the eyes of an orangutan, what do we see? We see eyes, and we see a spirit that actually mirrors our own. And this is why people get mesmerized by orangutans, because they can relate to them. And again, this has to do with their solitariness. Of course the females live in clans, but orangutans are individuals. That adult male who is roaming the forest, going all the way from West Borneo to East Borneo, which is maybe 700 kilometers, he's alone. He's like a deity. He doesn't need anybody. Except, he does like to mate with an occasional female. And the other thing about them, well, I'll save that for later, but so they're very individualistic. So when you relate to an orangutan, it's not like you're relating to an orangutan. You are relating to another individual, and he or she is relating to you as an individual. So it's very easy to bond with orangutans, because basically what we're looking at is somebody who is closer to our ancestors than we are. And this is what really makes them unique. And this is why they should not perish from this earth, because they represent something that we once were, something that we left behind, if you want to be, use analogy, left behind in the Garden of Eden. And this is why, we recognize their very benign, gentle, genteel nature. No, don't get me wrong, they're like humans. They can kill. You don't want to get into a fight with an adult male orangutan who's angry at you. So, what are the threats to orangutans? Well, there's lots of threats. There's poaching, and this picture illustrates 4 orphans who we took care of in our care center. And this picture was taken some years ago. They're gone now. They've gone back to the forest. And at this moment, we have 275 orphans or translocated orangutans in our care center. Orangutans that we hope to be able to return to the forest. And that's because people kill them. They kill them as pests, and the indigenous Dayaks traditionally killed them for food. They weren't a favored food, but if a Dayak was out in the forest hunting for pigs and he didn't come across a pig and he saw an orangutan up there in the canopy, he had a blowgun, kill them. They would eat them. And my husband, as I mentioned, indigenous, when he was a child, he ate orangutan. He never killed one, but he would hunt with a blowgun and poison darts. And I don't know how many pigs he's killed in his life, but there were quite a few. And the other interesting thing for me is that his sister, his older sister, also would go out with a spear and dogs and hunt pigs. It wasn't just the men. Occasionally women did too. Next, please. And of course, illegal logging. There was a time in central Indonesian Borneo when 90% of the logs that were leaving the province were illegally logged. Now, you look at this picture. You know this guy is an illegal logger. We don't see his feet, but he's probably wearing sandals. And he's not wearing a shirt, doesn't have safety equipment on. He's illegal. Next, please. Next, please. Illegal mining. So in our area, there's initially the mining was, hand logging. It was, I don't know what you'd call it, surface mining was for gold dust that had flowed from the alluvial, from the mountains of central Borneo, into the alluvial plains and fans near the seashore. And then they discovered zircon. And now they don't mine for gold so much, they mine for zircon. Next, please. This is the damage. Next, please. And this is what the two forks of our river where Camp Leakey is located. We are located on the right-hand fork of the Ziconia River. That's the Blackwater part. The left-hand fork is located where the illegal mining is taking place. And you can see what it looks like. It's very polluted. Next. And then palm oil. If orangutans go extinct, they will go extinct because of palm oil. And palm oil is spreading like a pestilence. So what is palm oil? Well, palm oil is a vegetable oil. And it's very cheap. Palm oil itself is like a weed. They can grow anywhere, as long as it's under 1,000 feet in terms of elevation. You grow in sandy soil. Doesn't care about the fertility of the soil. And it's semi-solid at room temperature. And it's used in everything. It's used in cosmetics, it's used in food, it's used in biofuel, it's used in detergents, it's used in toothpaste, everything. And unfortunately, it's marketed as green, healthy, and vegan. And it's labeled vegetable oil. So in Indonesia, if something is labeled vegetable oil, there's a very good chance it's palm oil. But it's not really so good for you. It's a saturated fat, and if you live on a diet of palm oil, your solid oil, your cooking oil, you sometimes bear a price for it. Next, please. And this is what the forest looks like after it's been cut down in order to produce palm oil as a harvest, as a crop. Next. And this picture was taken from the air, and you can see the forest, and you can see where the palm oil is expanding. And if you look at a map of Borneo now, I can't estimate how extensive the palm oil is in terms of actual areas, in terms of acres or hectares or whatever, or square kilometers. But I know that Tanjung Puting, which is a national park where I work, has become surrounded by palm oil plantations. Next, please. You can see it there. You can see where the red is. It's all palm oil. Next, please. And this is what it looks like. You can see where the palm oil is. And it's actually kind of beautiful. You know, when you drive through a palm oil plantation, like you saw in the picture where we were driving to pick up that particular orangutan that we confiscated, this is not that unpleasant. But it says something about palm oil itself, nothing wrong with it, but the effect of it is quite evil. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk to you about, now that I've talked about orangutans, is the problem facing orangutans, and that is extinction. So I've been there 50 years, 53, and next please. And during that time, the land leeches have decreased. In fact, for a while they actually disappeared. And I knew something was up because I remember thinking, I noticed it. No more leeches. When I first went to Borneo, went into the forest, I had leeches full of bloated with my blood, crawling out of my pants, on my neck. It was awful. Sometimes I'd lie in bed, actually it was a hammock, and then, a leech would drop from my bloated cords, leech would drop from my body. And then they disappeared. There were a few dry seasons, and they vanished. Now they're coming back. It's like 30, 40 years later, they're coming back. Next, the broadbills and their nests are far less abundant. It used to be every few 100 meters you'd see a broadbill nest. Now, not so many. Next, they're still there, but not so many. Invasive African snails have come and gone. I used to collect them. I thought they were native. They're big, nice shells. And then I discovered they were African invaders. And then they disappeared. Next. Oriental darters. They used to be, again, every 500 meters, you see them, sitting on branches and diving for fish. Gone. Locally extinct. Next. Sumatran rhinoceros. So, when I came to Borneo in 1971, the local people would show me mud wallows, and they'd say, those aren't pig wallows. Those are the wallows that the rhinoceros left behind. And the last officially extinct rhinoceros in our province of central Indonesian Borneo was in 1949, so I came in 1971. So it was basically 22 years later. And there were people alive who had probably even killed some of those rhinoceros. So what I'm saying is that extinction is a real problem. Most people don't see it, but I've seen it, because I've been there 53 years. I've seen all the animals and birds that have gone. And there could be more that I could talk about. So, next please. So I am not a biologist. I am a biological anthropologist, I'm a primatologist, but when you're dealing with a species like orangutans, which are on the verge of extinction, you become interested in the topic of extinction. And so I put together a list of what current theory predicts what are the certain biological attributes that increase vulnerability to extinction. Small populations, orangutans, yes. Island endemics, yes, only Sumatra and Borneo. 10,000 years ago, they were found in Southeast Asia and they were found in Java. 10,000 years ago, gone, probably because of the presence of humans. Large body size, absolutely diurnal. Large home range, yes. Slow life history traits, well, if you only give birth once every 8 years, that's pretty slow. High trophic level, no. The polar bears are going extinct. They're certainly at a high trophic level. Complex social structure, yes. You may not see it, it's subtle, but it's there. So the reason that I mention this is that orangutan natural history suggests that orangutans are susceptible to sudden changes in the environment. Now, the thing about extinction is that nobody really understands it. Nobody has actually documented it from beginning to end. Nobody. And the first paper, now again, I'm not a biologist, but the first paper that I've ever read about the processes of extinction that are, documented and sort of a theory of it, was published last year, 2023. So, but I was able to find one case history of where extinction was actually documented. Now, it was the very last stage of extinction, but it was still documented. Next. And that is the heath hen. And what happened to the heath hen, is interesting. We find that extinction is characterized by a precipitous decline that is often caused by sudden changes in the environment. So the heath hen is an example. So I've made a graph, and the heath hen population, by 1890 was 1900, the turn of last century. It was nearly hunted to extinction. There was only one population left. And so the Fish and Game Department in the United States, or agency in the United States, created a reserve, started to protect them. And this happened in 1910. And so these birds that had gone down to 55 individuals, they were able to count them, they're ground birds, went up to 2,000 in a matter of 10 years, almost 10 years, over 10 years, approximately 10 years. 2,000, they were beginning to thrive. And then what happened? The reserve was hit by fire. Most of it burned. A bit of the northern part was left, but most of it burned. Okay, so the population plummeted. And then what happened? Somebody brought in turkeys. Oh, I forgot one thing. Okay, after the fire, there was a very cold winter, and goosehawks shifted their prey birds to the heath hens, because the birds that they normally hunted had also gone into decline. Okay, so they're hit by the goosehawks, and then somebody brought in turkeys into the area and started farming turkeys. And the next thing you know, the turkeys had bird flu, a certain kind of bird flu, which the heath hens were not resistant to, and their number plummeted. So by 1930, there were only a few, I think there were 5 heath hens left, and all of them were males. And Fish and Game didn't quite know what to do. And I think they captured some of them, and they tried to, breed them with other types of hens, and wild fowl. Didn't work. And so by 1930, there was one heath hen left in captivity. It was a male. Fish and Game had him. And they decided to do the only thing that was ethically reasonable, and that is they released him back to the wild to die. And that is the story of the extinction of the heath hen. And we saw the end of it. I mean, we saw it wasn't just that it was hunted. It was also fire, predators, disease, and then the population collapsed and only males were left. And I had an experience like that in Camp Leakey. We ended up with, I don't know why it was 5 male cats, 5 male kittens, and so that population also went extinct. I mean, it was, just cats. invasive species, but they're good to have around because there's a lot of rats in Borneo. Anyways, so extinction often happens, and the thing about extinction is we don't see it coming. So passenger pigeons went extinct in 1914, and do you know that I think it was the Illinois state legislature actually passed a law prohibiting the killing of passenger pigeons about a year after they went extinct. They didn't see it coming. I mean, the sky was darkened by passenger pigeons, and then a few years later, to everybody's surprise, they were gone. We don't have to speculate about why. We can, but we don't have to right now. Tasmanian tigers, same thing. They disappeared, gone. Balinese tiger, gone. Okay. Next. So, what's happening to orangutans? And this is what I want to talk to you about. So, what are the benefits of studying animals for 50 years? This is my research study area. And we cut trails, we searched, and we have followed orangutans here since 1971. Originally, it was me and my first husband, Brenda Moore, and then many more people with assistants, students, volunteers. So we've been doing this now for 53 years. Next, please. So when I first started following wild orangutans, we encountered, during the first 4 years of my research, we encountered 64 adult males and 25 sub-adult males. And of course, 113 females because the females were static. There are clans of females. So from 1971 to 1975, orangutan encounter rates were very high. So what are the benefits of doing research for 50 years? Well, one of the benefits is if you do continuous long-term research, like I did for 50 years, you get a timeline. And in Florida, oh, thank you, can you hear me? Or you're kicking me off the stage. They have their ways of hinting. One of them is turning off the microphone. Anyway, so I'm getting to my point here, the point of my talk. So you're getting a timeline. So if you go to Borneo right now, if you go to Camp Leakey, and you have no background, you go there, and what do you see? You see, like Dr. Tim brings students from this, from this university. What do you see? You see lots of orangutans. You see all kinds of females. You see sub-adult males. You see lots of adolescent females. You see lots of infants. But what do you not see? What do you not see? You don't see adult males. And the title of my talk is, Where Have the Males Gone? What's happened to them? Well, I'll tell you a little story about recreational fishing in Florida. It's off the tip of Florida. So if you look at photographs, just, tourist photographs, recreational fisher people. And in the 1960s, they were catching fish like this. This is the average size of the fish they caught. 1960s, slightly smaller. 1970s, smaller. And now, if you go to those same areas and do recreational fishing, the average fish you're going to catch is about this big. But if you didn't know that, if you didn't know how big the fish were in the past years, you would never guess that this was anomalous, that this was not the way it always been. So you get a timeline. And we haven't understood extinction until just now. And so I'm asking the question, next, where have the males gone? And so what I've done is I've looked at our search, our encounters, the number of orangutan encounters. And every 10 years, since 1976 to 2016. And the reason that I looked at 2016 is because we actually did genetic studies in 2016 for the first time. And if you look at this side of the graph, it's the number of orangutan encounters. If you look at the bars, this is the number of search and follow days. And so what do you find? You find that the line is dropping, except in 2016, the adult males have decreased in terms of encounters, but the sub-adult males are going up a little bit. But the males as a group basically gone down. So this, next please. So we've also adjusted this for male encounters, male orangutan encounters per effort day. And what do we find? Well, we find that in 1976, when I first came there, 1 in 4 days we found a male. We searched for 4 days, we found a male. But in 1986, 10 years later, 1 in 10 days we found a male. And it went all the way down to 2006. And then in 2016, it started going up a little bit. The adult males weren't coming back. Something else was happening. Next, please. Well, in 2016, remember, we had 64 encounters with adult males during the first 4 years. How many did we have in 2016? Well, in 6 months of searching, and we had a lot more assistants now searching, we encountered 2 adult males. And now, we walk in the forest. You know, years ago, I would hear long calls virtually every day in the distance. And sometimes we even had adult males coming into camp. Now, we can search for days and days, months, and we don't find an adult male. So we found 2 adult males during 6 months in 2016. And the interesting thing is that the adult males were not related to each other in our genetic studies. And we looked at microsatellite genotyping, and microsatellites are repeating sections of non-coding DNA, which are inherited from parents to offspring. So flange males were not related to each other, but they were somewhat related to both sub-adult males and to the adult females. So what we suspect is that these 2 adult males did not come from a far distance. They came from the periphery of where the female population is. But the sub-adult males, remember, in the past, the sub-adult males would leave. They would leave their mother's home range and roam. Well, but the sub-adult males are now highly related to each other. And in fact, we found that one pair were brothers. It was an older brother who was 18 or 19 years of age. He should have been long gone, but he had a younger brother that was 12 years old, and he was there too. So the sub-adult males are related to the females the same way that the females are related to each other. Well, the reason they're related to the females is because the females are their mothers or their sisters, and the females, as I mentioned, are all the same clan. Next. These are the 2 adult males that we encountered in 2016. One of them we knew, wild male named Ponogoro. The other one just came through. He was basically transient. So So nobody really documented or has documented extinction from the beginning. I mean, even the heath hen, which is a very thorough documentation, was sort of at the end of the extinction process. So, like I mentioned, that in 2023, last year, some biologists proposed a timeline from a construct of data from many species, mainly birds, but also polar bears. So, now that we had this made us ask the question, is this behavior shift a pre-extinction early warning signal? And this is the predictive timeline of wildlife population collapse. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so where have the males gone? Which is my question. And if you look at this predicted timeline of wildlife population collapse, again, it's not based on one case history, it's based on a number of case histories put together. This is what happens with birds. So the first thing that happens is a behavior shift. When animals go extinct, the first step is a behavior shift. And then there's a morphological shift. So with birds, they get smaller. And the reason they get smaller is sometimes they have to fly further. And, they can't find the food, so they get smaller. Sorry. And so this was the theory. But, what we think is that, of course, if you're going to have a morphological shift, you're going to have genetic changes before the morphological shift. And then you have an abundance early warning signals. And then you have an abundance drop, population decline. And then after that, you get a downward slide to extinction. So what we're asking is, are these orangutans, is this population that I have been studying for 53 years, is it telling us that it's actually beginning the decline to extinction? And if this is happening in Tanjung Puting National Park, which has, if not the largest, one of the two largest orangutan populations, wild populations in the world. We have about 6,000 wild orangutans there, approximately. We don't know for sure, but approximately. What about all the other little populations in Borneo? The little tiny isolated ones, of which there are, a few hundred orangutans. What the heck is happening to them? What does that mean for those small and isolated small orangutan population fragments that are found throughout Borneo? So that's my question. Where have the males gone? We have to return to the males. Because without the males, the genetics, diversity of those different female populations, clans, is going to change. Because what do the males do? When the male comes from West Borneo to central Indonesian Borneo and mates with our Tanjung Puting females, what is he doing? He's increasing the genetic diversity. He's bringing new vigor to the population. And an example is the wolves of Sweden. Do you know that the wolves of Sweden for many years were small population, they didn't expand, they were kind of in decline, and then what happened? A lone wolf came from Siberia. And he mated with those females in Sweden. And now the Swedish wolf population is relatively healthy, and virtually all the wolves in Sweden now bear the genetics of this dark, handsome stranger that came from Siberia. I think he came from, 700 kilometers away. He wasn't a local wolf. So this is what happens with orangutans, is these males come in, sometimes they stay a few years, but sometimes they just come in, win a battle or two. There was an adult male, wild male called Win. He won 2 battles, and we thought he'd stay. But he was a wild male. He kept on moving. But I'm sure he left some of his genetic benefit behind. So where have the males gone? Well, they're not in Tanjung anymore. So what can we do? We have to return the males. And so one of the things that we are now planning, trying to persuade the Indonesian government, we're going to have massive funding, and it's going to take 10 to 20 years to do this, is we are going to try and build a corridor. So the orangutans in the northern Borneo, in a national park called Bukit Raya, Bukit Baka, will have a corridor, 273 kilometers, to go all the way to the south, to Tanjung Puting. So the males will be free to roam. So, next slide. So what I'd like to say, I'm going to end my talk. I probably talked too long, but let's give him a future. He's one of the wild orangutans that we released into the wild. He needs to be able to come back. He needs to be able to go. He needs to be able to find a population of females that he is not related to, that is not considered his mother, his sister, his niece, his aunt, but a new population he's not particularly related to. So he can provide the benefits of genetic diversity, and we don't get all these cascading effects that we see once the extinction process begins. So let's give him a future. Let's give the adult males a future. They need to be able to roam. They need corridors. And I've already talked to some highly connected people in the Indonesian government, and they say they understand. I mean, these people are smart, and they understand. And of course, the problem is that half this corridor is in the hands of palm oil plantations, so we're going to have to negotiate with palm oil plantation. Sometimes you can negotiate with them and persuade them, not by paying them, but sometimes you have to buy land. And we have actually created a very small 20, 30 kilometer corridor in our area over the past 20 years. So let's give the orangutan males a future. Let's give the orangutan species a future. And the orangutan males need to be able to roam. The females aren't going to go anywhere. I mean, they're killed on us. They're killed when the palm oil plantations come in and clear cut. They go, but the males roam. So, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me. And, okay. I hope that you will join us in this journey. Thank you very much.
I'm just waiting for one second. Oh, there's one coming? I got this one now. It's karaoke time. You've got to hold your own microphone. So, thank you so much for sharing such... I have to say that I've seen a lot of scientists speak in my time, and not many of them bring in such breadth of knowledge across political, social, cultural into their talks. That was amazing. So thank you for sharing. Now, we put out a question box. So we've got a rapid-fire question box situation going here from Shally. Shally asks, what is the most surprising behaviour that you've had with or observed with orangutans?
I've observed many surprising behaviors, but I think one of them orangutans are solitary, or semi-solitary in the case of the females, and we once captured a female, an adult female, and her infant because they were sick and we wanted to treat them. And what amazed me is that the daughter, the adolescent daughter, tried to retrieve her younger brother, who was an infant, from the cage, but she couldn't do it because, the cage had bars and she couldn't pull him through. And she stayed above that cage for several days while we treated the mother and the infant. And then, when we opened the cage, she went right in and she took the infant, her younger brother, and took him up into the trees. And then the mother followed. And then there was, a few trees later, maybe a few minutes later, there was an exchange. The daughter gave her younger brother back to the mother. And to me, that was really amazing because I had always thought of them as semi-solitary. But clearly, the adolescent female had feelings for her younger brother.
Yeah, but what happens with that, right? Because you just become an angry old loner.
I'm sorry?
Why do they become angry old loners? Why don't they remain social throughout their whole life, those females?
Well, they don't retain their sociality for their whole lives. By the time they have their second infant, like I mentioned, they're spending most of their time alone.
Why?
But they recognize their kin, and they recognize the orangutans that they grew up with, which are mainly females, and the males leave, so they don't really recognize the males, maybe when they come back. And they sometimes do come back. They don't come back very often, but I remember there was one male who actually came back 8 years later. Now, we don't know who his parents were, or who his mother was, but he was an adult male, he left, and then he came back 8 years later. There was another male who left and then came back 3 years later. And I remember thinking, I had dreams about him. I had dreams of finding his skeleton, in a nest in the trees. I thought he died. And then one day he came back, and I remember thinking, there is life after death. Well, because I thought he died, right? Yeah, so. So it has to do with the distribution of the food in the environment. That's what it has to do with. Like I said, if you're a 100-pound female, you can't stick around with a 300-pound male because you're eating fruit. And the problem with fruit is that there's not enough of it. Each fruit tree has a certain amount of fruit, and once you have to stop eating it after a time. Well, if there's leaves everywhere. And bark, there's bark everywhere. But if you're a fruit eater, you have to make sure that you get enough. And orangutans do starve. During the dry season, when there's no fruit available and they're eating bark as their backup food in Borneo, you see them. You see a male that months earlier, had a fat belly and, full of fat, and then you see him several months later and he raises his arm and you can see his ribs. So, they gain a lot of fat, they lose a lot of fat. The Sumatran ones are slightly different because their fallback food is strangling figs, which are aseasonal. Yeah.
Now, I have a question that I had written down, and Helena has asked a really similar one, and I think it may link to you dreaming about one of these individuals. Helena asks, do you have a religion or belief system that sustains your work, or is it all science?
Do I have a spiritual? Yes, I was raised a Roman Catholic, and very strong Roman Catholic. And then when I got a divorce, I decided that I was a Protestant. And, it's Christianity, right? So I think what sustains me is my belief in something beyond myself. And it's actually a belief, it looks like in a deity that is Mother Nature. I mean, we're human. I mean, we live, we die. I mean, who knows what goes beyond? But, we have to be good people, and that's what, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's what I learned as a child. And the problem is that we are not doing this to the animals, to the plants that we share this world with. So, but that's my spiritual belief. That's how I was raised. And also, to whom much is given, much is expected. Now, I'm not saying, I'm basically what would you call me? A Christian Buddhist? A Christian Druid? But yes, I have a very deep spirituality. And I think it sustains me. And I think it sustains many people that I work with, even though they might not put a name to it. But it's there.
Yeah. And it's a mistaken belief to believe, I think, that science is a human pursuit, right?
I'm sorry?
Science is a human pursuit, so you can't actually separate the human from the science. So that is something, science isn't something that sits separate, I would argue.
Well, remember what Einstein said. Einstein said that God doesn't play dice with the universe. I don't know what his faith was.
Maths.
I know which one he was born with, but I don't know what his faith was.
One final little question from the audience, and it runs on beautifully. Thank you, Sophie, who put this question in. Sophie wants a message for future scientists.
Basically, it's the same message I would give anybody, and that is follow your dreams and do the best you can.
So, now...
Respect nature.
What's that?
And respect nature.
And respect nature. There's an addendum. Yes! Now, it is my great pleasure to ask to the stage the man with the drive behind this whole event and the doctor's visit to Newcastle. Now, Tim Roberts is an emeritus professor, which sort of means they wanted him to retire but couldn't get rid of him. I think. He's the director of the Tom Farrell Institute for the Environment at the Uni of Newcastle for ages, and in his field of biotechnology, he has a list of papers, like publications, right, longer than 2 orangutan arms put together end on end. So why was he so passionate about bringing a primatologist to Australia? Let's hear it straight from Tim.
Well, enough of that. What a pleasure it is to see a almost full, beautiful, beautiful town hall. It is fantastic, and thank you all for coming. And also to these ladies on the stage, thank you for coming, because you've made the night, you and you, one from Borneo and one from Victoria. My passion is science, of course, and science communication, and to take students to Borneo and to go to Camp Leakey and just to read about this person I knew nothing about. In 2018, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great to expose Newcastle to such passion, such interest? Somebody for the first 3 years of her research was in a tent and then in a better cabin, but writing up her notes every night by candlelight. 3 years later, she got a generator to actually have electricity to write up the notes at night. But I was enthralled, and I wanted to try and bring Biruté to Newcastle, and so we've done it. So my job now is first of all, to ask any Borneo travellers in the audience to stand up, particularly my students have been, and the rest of you, watch them. Biruté will be pleased. Would you all stand up, those who've been to Borneo with me? Thank you very much. So the word has got out, and the word is in Newcastle that you are doing great things in Borneo. I just want to finish up by thanking our partners in dollars, sitting up the top there, my Hunter Innovation and Science Hub, the Newcastle University and the City of Newcastle. And I'd like to thank all of our other sponsors, because that has allowed us to pay for the air tickets and bring these two lovely ladies across. And I wonder if, Ruth, you'd just come out with me for a minute. Ruth Linsky is PhD student of Biruté Galdikas. Ruth is in. Come out for God's sake. There we are, that's better. And Ruth now is following in the footsteps of her PhD supervisor. Our sponsors have allowed us to bring these people here, and I thank you, sponsors one and all. Sponsors large and small, I meant to say. I want to thank also the volunteers. You've seen John, who's been mastering of ceremonies by run sheet after run sheet after run sheet, and has done a fantastic job. John Shield, and then all the other volunteers who've also worked so very, very hard. So hard to put together that wonderful exhibition out there. The artists who have supported our silent auction with their art. And I urge you all to line up your phones and start bidding and buy something to take home which will be unique and will generate more money that will go via OFI Australia to allow Biruté to form this pathway, to form this stepping stone, to form this connectivity trail to let those poor males roam around Borneo without being killed. So with that, finally, I want to say, Anne Jones, thank you for coming up, and thank you for being so eloquent and so smart, and I hope everybody out here listens to What the Duck on ABC Radio.
Longer and longer, but I just wanted to thank everybody. We have received such incredibly wonderful hospitality by all the people that we have met in Newcastle. It really has been extraordinary. And of course, Dr. Tim, above all, because he's the one that brought us here, but everybody that we have met, extraordinary, extraordinary. And then I also wanted to make a comment about Ruth Linsky. So she is my graduate student, and I just wanted to mention the fact that she is the one who did the genetics that I mentioned. And the genetics really elucidated what was happening. I mean, we kind of knew what the relationships were, but once you get it done genetically, you know for sure. Thank you.
Well done. I'll hand over now to our Master of Ceremonies to tell us all where to go.
Right. I think he wants to be told to duck off, doesn't he? Quack, quack. No, okay. Everybody, you're welcome to join us outside for a little bit of a nibble, a little bit of a drink, and a time to ask questions of all of these people who have been to Borneo and I have not. So I'll see you out there.